monument to ignorance that maybe someday will make nice condos. So anyway, that's going to wrap up this section. We're going to go into the interview with Abby Hafer, and we're going to talk about creationism and how science actually works. So hopefully you enjoy that interview, and that'll be right after this little break. This is Phil Ferguson with Polaris Financial Planning, the home of science-based investing. I see people owning really bad investments all of the time. Many advisors are paid a commission by a big company to sell you something you may not need. It's kind of like church. They create fear, then they tell you what you want to hear, and then they take your money. What you want is an advisor that is paid only by you. That is a fee-only fiduciary advisor. Remember, people work for who they are paid by. You can contact me, Phil, at PolarisFinancialPlanning.com, or listen to the cleverly titled The Phil Ferguson Show. Each show, we have an interesting investing skeptically topic and an interview with someone fighting to end religion. Polaris also gives 10% of gross revenue to support the growing secular movement. You're not just getting better investments, you're helping to change the world. All right, everybody, welcome back. This is Phil Ferguson, and of course, you are listening to The Phil Ferguson Show. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about evolution and, dare I say it, I've got my radio scare quotes up, intelligent design. And with me is Dr. Abby Hafer. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I am fantastic. For the listeners who don't know, of course, you and I met at the American Humanist Association conference a few weeks back in Chicago. And you gave a talk on intelligent design?
Yes. I gave a talk that was called Animals That Shouldn't Exist According to Intelligent Design, but Do Anyway.
Now, we're going to get into that, and before we get any farther, of course, I want to make sure we plug your book. It's called The Not-So-Intelligent Designer, Why Evolution Explains the Human Body and Intelligent Design Does Not, of course, available in all major bookstores and on Kindle for just $9.99.
Right.
And how did
Check it out. It's available on Amazon. It's a fun book.
Yeah. How did that come about?
Okay. Well, this is a lot of fun. The way that it all got started is, I should explain my background because this will help the whole story make sense.
Excellent.
I have a doctorate in zoology from Oxford University. I also teach human anatomy and physiology at Curry College in Massachusetts. And so there was one time a few years ago when I was trying to figure out why intelligent design and creationism still had any traction in the United States. And it basically came down to the fact that it is a political argument. It is not a scientific one. But, where there's a political will, a whole bunch of determined wrong people can still get very far. And so then I realized that the scientific community had been approaching this all wrong because we were behaving like scientists and assuming that the data would speak for itself. Whereas in the political arena, you need arguments that are short and easy to understand and easy to repeat and preferably entertaining, the kind of thing you can put on a poster.
I like where you're going with this. Tell me more.
So I gave myself the assignment of what would a political style argument for evolution even look like. And I just kind of put that on the back burner and didn't know what I was going to come up with. And then one day I was teaching human anatomy and physiology, as I so often do, and we were talking about reproductive systems. And I had just put the male reproductive system on the board, and I had drawn the testicles on the outside where they are, and I asked if anybody in the class knew why the testicles are on the outside. There's usually somebody who does, and somebody did. And the answer, of course, is that testicles have to hang outside the body in order to keep them cooler because normal human body temperature is too hot for sperm production. So as I was turning around to write this on the board, I thought, that's really stupid. why would normal human body temperature not be compatible with sperm production? That is like the worst design I've ever heard of, and I knew right there that I had my first perfect argument against intelligent design in the human body, because once I started talking about testicles, people would pay attention.
Well, and it's funny because the first question I was going to ask you, and the very beginning of the book, is all about testicles. And I thought, if she doesn't bring this up, I'm going to. But where did you go first? You went right into testicles. Now, I'm assuming, and you are the zoologist, so I'll ask you, I'm assuming then every single animal must have its testicles outside of its body, right?
Why, no. That's what makes it so much fun, is that, okay, many mammals have their testes on the outside. Now, first of all, I should explain that all cold-blooded animals, like, for instance, frogs that you probably dissected in high school, they all have their testes on the inside. And you have to understand it's a much more protected position. Having the testes on the outside, as any human male is likely to be willing to explain to you, is a very vulnerable position, and men risk severe pain and worse because of this unfortunate positioning. And meanwhile, frogs don't have that problem. So, of course, you may ask yourself, if indeed there is a creator or an intelligent designer, does that designer like frogs better than men? But you could also perhaps ask, well, but what if warm body temperature is just not compatible with sperm production? And the answer there is, but it is. Because there are lots of animals that keep their bodies warm that also have their testes on the inside. For instance, marine mammals. For instance, count them all birds, and birds actually have higher body temperatures than we do. It also includes elephants and rhinoceroses, and so again, you kind of wonder about the designer that, rather small, vulnerable human males have the additional vulnerability of their testicles on the outside, whereas a big, tough rhinoceros is better protected. And there's also the business of animals like rats and mice, which have what I call convertibles. That is to say, now think about this for a moment and think how much human males could enjoy this. Rats and mice can basically put their testicles inside when they're safer, when they need to do that for safety. But on the other hand, if they want to breed, they just haul them back out again, let them cool off, and sperm are made fresh every day. And then if they want to reproduce, then they reproduce with their testes hanging outside, which means that they not only get protection when they want it, they can also control their fertility. And I can think of many human males who would consider this a rather good deal. But, of course, the designer didn't do that for us. And, again, you just kind of have to wonder about this designer's sympathies, or if we are indeed made in the designer's image, if he gave the good stuff to rats.
Fair enough. Now, just to be fair in a gender-neutral binary kind of way, you also have a chapter about the birth canal. What's going on there? Absolutely. And as any woman who has ever given birth can tell you, the birth canal is just much, much, much too small. And in the days before modern medicine, it was not at all unusual for either the mother to die in childbirth or the baby to die in childbirth, or indeed both. Childbirth was a very, very risky situation in the days before modern medicine, and it is still a risky situation in the areas that don't have access to modern medicine. So it's really not a good design. And from an engineering standpoint, it's kind of this dual problem where on the one hand, we walk upright, we walk on two legs, but on the other hand, we are very smart. And walking upright favors people with narrow hips because narrow hips
make walking much easier and more efficient. On the other hand, high intelligence requires large heads. And large heads have to fit through the birth canal, so large heads favor large birth canals and therefore wide hips. So there's this tension between these two design parameters. And an engineering student just starting, with a whiteboard and those specifications would have come up with something very different. For instance, if you simply wanted this being to have hands, you could always make them centaurs, 4 legs, 2 hands, a head. The hips could be wider, problem solved. Or you could do it the way kangaroos do it. Kangaroos go around on 2 legs as well. They're bipeds like us. And what they do is that they give birth to very small embryo-like young that then finish their development on the outside of the mother's body in that pouch that kangaroos are famous for having. And the pouch has a little nipple in it and everything. So, as I said, what kangaroos do is give birth to essentially embryos, which are then placed in this pouch on the outside of the mother's body, and that's where they continue their development. And that's really the way to do it if you're going to be a biped. And yet, the designer did not do that for us. And, most women who have given birth can generally agree that it really would have been a lot easier to take that baby out when it was really small and just nurture it on the outside. That just would have saved a lot of grief, and in the old days, far more to the point, it would have saved us from a lot of death.
Well, it's one of those things that because of evolution, it doesn't have to be good. It just has to be good enough.
Well, that's exactly it. This is the point that I always make, is that intelligent design and evolution have very different bars that they set. The standard for evolution is good enough to not cause death too much of the time. Or more specifically, good enough to not cause death before reproduction.
Yeah. I was just going to ask if you would accept that caveat. Yes, you have to be able to live long enough to reproduce and either help your offspring or at least not hinder them or provide a way for them to beat the odds to survive. Otherwise, you go extinct.
Right. Whereas, of course, the standard for intelligent design is designed by an intelligent designer. And if you're positing, after all, somebody who made the entire universe and did things like that, then you would tend to think that the designer would be pretty powerful and pretty smart. And yet there are these obvious design flaws that we got that could easily have been done better by any good engineer. And more to the point, other animals got them. So it's not the case that it is impossible. It is not the case that the Creator doesn't know how to do it. It's that the Creator did it other places, but not for us.
I like where you're going with this. Now, what I want to do is take a little break, and when I come back, let's talk about the wedge strategy. Are you okay staying around a little longer?
Sure.
All right, well, hang on. We'll take a commercial break, and we'll be right back.
Here's an excerpt from Nailed by David Fitzgerald.
Didn't there have to have been a Jesus? Perhaps he was just a wandering teacher or an exorcist, an apocalyptic prophet or a zealot who opposed the Romans. Perhaps he was all these things, or even a composite of several such early first-century figures. But at any rate, surely there had to be somebody at the original core of Christianity, arguably the most famous individual in human history. All this seems to be a perfectly reasonable, completely natural assumption to make, so why would anyone be so foolish as to propose that Jesus never existed? Doesn't it just make more sense to assume that there was a historical Jesus, even if we're unable to recover the real facts about his life and death? As it turns out, no. The opposite is true. The closer we look at the evidence for Jesus, the less solid evidence we find, and the more we find suspicious silences and curious resemblances to the pagan and Jewish religious ideas and philosophies that preceded Christianity. And once you begin to parse out the origins of this tradition or that teaching from their various sources, The sweater begins